The horror we feel at the thought of death, the desire for death, and the anguish of the individual confronting the general continuity of existence. These are the sources of our erotic fevers and our sacred experiences. Man is not only a discontinuous being, but he is aware of his discontinuity, and this awareness is anguish, the need to lose ourselves in continuity, to expend our excess in the face of death, drives us to acts of transgression.
Welcome back, warriors, philosophers. Joining me again is Patrick to discuss his next seminal work titled Death in Spring. Feels very poignant here at the death of spring, the death of summer, as we're moving into sweater season. But this one it gave me existential angst, to be honest with you, Patrick.
That's
it
the point,
feels
right?
it feels like you're battering me. I'm torn between ways on this. So I'm excited to get a positive insofar as we can framework on it. How to move forward. First, I wanted to ask you, do you have an overarching trajectory planned for this series? Do you have a place you're trying to go, or is this a work that you're carving out of stone?
Yeah, I want to make it into my first nonfiction works. Funny enough, I wrote a nonfiction book that I did not really publicize at all. I
Huh.
think 13 people bought copies of it. It was mainly friends and family. It was called Thoughts of an Angry Young Man, and I wrote that in 2023. I had a brief 3.5 month deployment on a Coast Guard boat in the summer of 2023.
Hmm.
And I mainly was synthesizing works from Nietzsche, Ernst Junger, Yukio Mishima, Julius Evola. So it was mainly just kind of an exhortation. But this would be my first genuine attempt at a nonfiction work. And of course, I would title it Radical Aesthetics. And this sort of essay series, my intention is that they are the body of that work, and then I'll add in between them some more in-depth analysis. But that's where I'm going with it is to develop radical aesthetics. And right now it's largely a synthesis of existing systems, existing thinkers. But I do want to contribute not only an original synthesis, which I'm already sort of doing, but also a completely original idea. And to do that, I have to have, as Giorgiani would put it, a substantive ontology and epistemology, which is why he considers Alexander Dugin not to be a philosopher, for those that are familiar with Dugin. But yeah, I want to turn it into a book, ideally, and I just wanted to do a brief mention. Last time we mentioned Charlie Kirk, and there's been another death. Of course, you saw my post about it.
Hmm.
A very noble young man by the name of Raul Giammatteo. He was working on a translation for DVX Publishing, and he was basically killed. He was in a coma for 50 days before passing away after just a chaotic brawl in Spain. And I go more into the depth into that into a podcast I have coming out on Friday, which this probably will be published after that. So I
Wow.
guess maybe people watch the podcast already, but we go into his life, honoring him, and then sort of talk about other things. But I just wanted to briefly mention Raul. I never got to meet him in person, but he was very much involved in all these sort of ideas and was a big supporter of my channel, and of course DVX Publishing, our book company, good friends with many of my friends as well. So I just wanted to briefly mention him. But yeah, and the book, assuming everything goes well and I'm able to write it, will be dedicated towards Raul as well.
Wow. God bless Raul. That is, yeah, so many tragedies piling up on a daily basis. Was he able to come close to finishing his translation? Is that anywhere near publishable?
Unfortunately, not. It was from Italian, and he is an Italian man. And I say is because he is still with us. He is never gone forever, so long as his name is iterated. And of course, in my podcast coming up, assuming YouTube doesn't sack my channel one day, then he'll live forever in that video. And then, of course, in the works dedicated towards his name afterwards. But no, unfortunately, it was still very much beginning parts of it, maybe like a third. So if we're gonna come out with that publication, still that translation would have to largely get someone else to translate it, or perhaps I'll have to take the mantle myself and learn Italian, which I genuinely intend to do, given how many thinkers who wrote primarily in Italian. Also, there's a lot of works from writers such as Gabriele D'Annunzio, Marinetti, who he was translating, which haven't been translated yet. So it really is an untapped market. So I might just learn Italian myself for both, so I can read those things and translate them, so more people like yourself, unless you secretly know Italian. Maybe I'm being a bit unfair to you.
Arrivederci. No, I've never learned another language. My tongue can't handle them. But I greatly appreciate those kind of efforts and the cross contamination of thoughts and thinkers. You mentioned Evola in here as well, who I believe was Italian. That might
Yes,
be
the
slanderous,
Baron of
blasphemous.
Sicily, they called him, I believe.
The Baron of Sicily. Yeah, this whole realm of Italian 20th century thinkers is completely obscure to me. So I'm incredibly grateful for the chance to go through it with you. In summary of your last article, highly recommend everybody check it out, as well as the video where you expound on it at length. Very fascinating. But you mentioned at part in this essay, in my previous essay, Being and Becoming, I argue that science provides us the is and how, but not the what and the why. And it is the what and the why that you are getting into here. Is that a fair summary of this existential angst portion in particular?
It still has to do with a sort of ontology of being, but it is setting up the grounds to take the descriptive of reality so far as we understand reality currently, and then attach a prescriptive valuation of how we're going to move forward. So it's a bridge still. So it's not quite totally in the what and the why, but I am certainly, with that in mind, trying to slowly impel a construction of some sort of fabric that brings that assertion of being and becoming, and then what we're going to do with it, how we're going to move forward. So it's certainly related.
Amen. And you are building in some amazing cornerstones here as well. One of the questions I wanted to uh, ask at the beginning, which does reference the first part of this essay, which we're not going to get into. Again, readers, check it out for yourselves. But Mishima, you talk about how he valiantly took his own life, committed seppuku, harikari, which is, for anyone not familiar, the fascinating ritual of disemboweling yourself prior to a second, a lieutenant, uh, cutting off your head.
If you're
Um,
lucky, if you don't have a second, you just have to bear with the pain. Actually, sometimes what they'd do is, if you didn't have a second, you would go across, you take it out, and then you do your throat afterwards. Elegance and brutality.
That is an incredibly brutal way to end. It made me, and I don't know if you see any parallels here, but it made me think of the other famous assassination or self assassination, that of Hitler after World War II, and how he's said to have shot himself, which is not only a less noble way to take one's own life, but it does parallel the finality of their missions in some way, it seems to me, in such a way that like the weapon, the because Mishima had access to guns, right? Like he could have
Yes.
used rifles and such, but he chose a sword. He chose that implement. Do you see any parallel there with the weapon that symbolizes these different movements? And do you think that radical aestheticism itself has a weapon of choice? Is it the pen? Is it the word? Is it something deeper? Not to lead into revolutionary territory here, but weapons and
Sure.
meanings. It seems fascinating.
Well, of course, there's it's obvious Mishima's weapon of choice being the tanto, so the short blade,
Hmm.
which would be used for the disembowelment, in couple with the katana and his own sword, by the way. And if the biopic is accurate, it was a sword from the 16th century, I believe, that he had
Wow.
purchased. So very, very old relic of samurai tradition. But that's very much a Japanese method of death. Of course, the Romans had something similar, I believe, where you would fall upon your own gladius,
Mm.
which is somewhat similar. So disembowelment or death by your own sword is certainly not unique to the Japanese, but harakiri in specific, that method, disembowelment with the second, I do believe, is unique to the Japanese. And of course, we can even go into the Aztecs because I mentioned the accursed share. I didn't bring up the Aztec rituals, or the Mexican. Let's say Mexican to simplify it, but of course, talking about pre Spanish colonization Mexico.
Yeah.
Uh, they had their own methods of sacrifice, which were quite interesting, which of course Bataille talks about in the Accursed Chair. I didn't bring that up specifically, but with Hitler's own death, I think at that, the Germans, I'm not familiar with any sort of German ritual suicide,
Yeah.
but at that point, the mythology of his death, he basically didn't want his body to be taken by the Soviets because he believed, I think they embalmed Lenin's body actually, which is interesting, and put it up in a museum. And I think he didn't want his body to be embalmed and put on display and sort of paraded as a relic of the Soviets' victory. And then
Yeah.
also another reason he did that was because of the brutal death of Benito Mussolini, who was killed by Italian socialist partisans in a very brutal way. It reminds me of the way that Muammar Gaddafi was killed by the Libyan people. And now, granted, the German people were extremely loyal to him, so I don't think he would have experienced. He had much more control than Mussolini did on
Hmm.
his constituency, so I don't think that was probably the overall reason. It was more so what the Soviets would do with his body. But that's, I guess I'm droning on about a sort of moot point here. It's not terribly relevant, but I just, yeah, that was the sort of reason he killed himself, and then of course had his inner circle and whatever troops were left in the Führer bunker burn his body with gasoline. But as you all know, I actually met Hitler on a trip to Argentina 10 years ago. He's very old now. He's probably like 140. And I couldn't understand what he was saying because he has dentures now, but he's actually alive and well. That was his body double. So yeah, just kidding.
Makes sense. I heard he was on the moon, but if you met him in Argentina, I'm not going to
Well, he's in the
argue.
moon now. That was 10 years ago, so
Oh,
he's
okay.
probably he's probably in the moon now.
Yeah, SpaceX has
He
progressed
sent
enough
he
to get
sent
him
a
up there.
postcard.
Still on your Christmas list. That's good to know. Uh,
Surprisingly, yeah.
it does seem like I hadn't really connected that the Stalinist or the Russian communist obsession with what is basically an Egyptian burial rite, the embalming. That's very interesting.
I'll
And
have to double check,
Mussolini
but I think
was
so.
he was strung up and speared, right? Is that correct? That's how he
Uh,
died out.
they like hung him upside down with his mistress. I forget her name. His
Jesus.
original mistress was Margarita Sarfati. I think his next mistress was Petrucci or something like that. But essentially, at that point of the war, it was, they were trying to get to, I believe, Switzerland,
Hmm.
and he didn't have any guards with him anymore because he was trying to go under the radar, get through the Alps, but they were captured and then very brutally killed by the partisans. So yeah, brutal stuff, brutal stuff.
Incredibly brutal. And I do want to get right into your article, but one of the lines you had in here that I absolutely loved was of all conceivable luxuries, death in its fatal and inexorable form is undoubtedly the most costly. This idea of death as a luxury and how you choose or are forced to spend yours is something I bet will come up again and again. But jumping right in, if I could just begin reading the section titled Existential Anguish, this aspect of our being over being, again referencing your previous work, impels us to confront our finitude intentionally. We are thrown into being, and thus our will is forced to act and assert itself. Martin Heidegger writes in Being and Time, death is a possibility of being which Dasein itself has to take over in every case. With that, Dasein stands before itself in its own most potentiality for being. This is a possibility in which the issue is nothing less than Dasein's being in the world. Its death is the possibility of no longer being able to be there. The whole Dasein thing is so opaque to me. Could you dive into that or explore it
Yeah,
in your own way?
absolutely, absolutely. So the character of Dasein, being in the world, and in relation to what I'm trying to demonstrate here, and sort of what I also explore later on in the essay, is as capital B beings, we are aware that we are finite beings thrown into the world with a time limit to the amount of time we live in the world. And because of that, we do have to intentionally confront death. Even if we are intentionally ignoring death, we do have to make a decision about how we decide to confront this inevitability.
Hmm.
And as Daseins, beings in the world, uh, we do have this natural sort of, let's say, anguish, angst. Anguish is the word that I believe Bataille uses, but as Daseins and as beings propelled into the world, beings that are destined for death, and of course that's where the term "being to death" comes in, which I introduce many times throughout the essay. We have a unique ability to intentionally interact with the world in ways that do not fit within utilitarian behavior, and that's something
Hmm.
I talk about without getting. We'll probably touch up on that later, but essentially the fact that we are Daseins, that we are beings in the world, capital B beings, we can do things that aren't pre-programmed into our biology. Now, granted, the sleepwalker of modernity that I talk about in Promethean Dreams has come upon us, and most people really are practically lowercase beings in this day and age. However, even those lowercase b beings have the ability to escape from the matrix, so to speak, and begin to intentionally interact with life and with death in such a way where there is no clear answer, there is no clear direction, which is also why fluxed being versus static being is important here. The static being of the Hindu, which is personified in Atman or Brahman or the Christian soul, there is a path laid out for that being, and it's still a capital B being, for that being to confront death, to confront life, to be in the world. It is strictly painted out the correct way to be. Therefore, it's easy to a large degree because there's nothing you can do about it. And
Hmm.
you're going to have this if you do that. It's a clear input output. It's simple. But in Heidegger's view of reality, there is no clear answer of how to face these questions. Same with Bataille and Bataille's essential critique of capitalism and by extension Marxism as well regarding material accumulation. There is no clear answer because we are capital B beings and we are aware of our temporality. We have to interact in a non-utilitarian way or lie to ourselves, do what Camus would call social suicide, and adopt these preordained patterns of life which negate our free will and put us within boxes that make us comfortable, but also limit the ways in which we can interact with the world. And I hope that answers your question. There's a little bit, bringing different parts together.
It does. It does. That thrownness, that trajectory is what brought me so much angst during the entirety of your essay. It's like it feels like you array the paths in front of us, and then the one forward is the one that is the most challenging to take. Makes sense. But it did raise a question as I was reading it as well. Do you think it is possible to have that uppercase being, that Dasein which truly and nobly confronts its own inevitable demise without the lowercase being? If there was not that dichotomy there, could becoming in the way you're describing actually be possible?
Probably not. And of course, that's where I get into the pathos of difference that Nietzsche talks about.
Mm,
And even in relation to uppercase beings, uppercase B beings, there is still that differentiation which qualifies this uniqueness of individuals, that we're not just atomized individuals, right? And this is true socially. And this is one of my biggest critiques of liberalism. And it's funny that we brought up Dugin earlier. And I've said this on many podcasts. I'm not a really big fan of Dugin's work just because I feel they're raw. They're simpler than they're made out to be, but that doesn't
mm,
mean that they don't have still poignant truths to them. And one of them is that liberalism becomes a form of totalitarianism because people and cultures, different societies have unique expressions of themselves as Daseins. They have unique evolutions of their beings. Liberalism tries to attach a framework which is uniquely European, uniquely modern, as in post Enlightenment modern, and tries to assert that across the whole world, which has totally different ways of being, totally different cultures. And they wonder why, when we try to do regime change in the Middle East, for instance, why it doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work because these beings, these Daseins, as a people, are totally different from us. They have a
mm,
totally different being in the world, and their being develops totally differently. So, what I'm getting at here is that This difference is the qualification of uniqueness. Without that difference, we become atomized. We become the same. We kind of, when some people talk about singularity as this return to that point, that little hot piece of energy
Cosmic
condensed,
gas.
right?
Yeah.
Sure, that's no way to live, right? Our differentiation, inequality, for instance, and we talked about this in our last podcast, inequality is the very essence of beauty, the very essence of identity and uniqueness. And yes, you do need the lowercase beings, but you also need difference within the uppercase beings. I mean, even if you look at something like childhood, right? You are going to be subordinate to your parents' will as part of your growth and necessary for your growth in a good way. This is where archetypes, I think Carl Jung probably goes a little too far with his archetypes as sort of static. He almost makes them a little too static, but we do have to adhere to some extent to these archetypes, which do sort of provide us identity. And this is where a lot of the post-structuralists, the post-Marxist leftists go very far in their critical view of history, to the point where if you read Anti-Oedipus by Deleuze, they're really trying to get rid of every form of identity, every form of connection to archetypes, the Oedipal. Let's consider that the Freudian archetypes, which Jung obviously builds off of. Anti-Oedipus means getting rid of all those archetypes, freeing yourself. And I absolutely agree with this idea of freedom, of being. But to be a free being, you also have to be something. If you're nothing at all, if you're the complete schizophrenic, and you have to be schizophrenic to a certain point of view, you can't be limited by society and dogma. But if you have nothing that you stand for at all, you end up precisely what Nietzsche critiques in Human All Too Human. And I think that quote was in my last essay. Yes, it was, where he talks about the need for a metaphysics, the need for an ontology, the need for a history that we are part of. If you get rid of all that, then we do become the same. Then we do lose our sense of identity and uniqueness. And this is where Deleuze and Foucault and all these guys just start to fall apart. Well, I agree to a certain extent about deconstructing the divinity of tradition, the divinity of archetypes. Like, yeah, sure, they're not this Hegelian divine that underpins reality, but that doesn't mean they're not useful. That doesn't mean they're not necessary. Archetypes are necessary. These things are necessary for us to be without any anchoring in something. And that anchor doesn't have to hold us back, but it has to tell us where we come from. Because what we are is imperfect. What we are is a culmination of good and bad decisions. What we are is different. If we were all the same, then you aren't really a being at all. And then, you sort of, this whole idea of the Brahman, right? That's like the ultra ascetic assertion. You could also have the ultra temporal, the ultra material assertion, but they end up being two sides of the same coin, because if everything's Brahman and if everything's just nothing, it really is the same in the sense that you all become part of something where there is no uniqueness, there is no beauty of being, no beauty of Dasein. And again, I went a little bit off the rails with that, but does that sort of answer your question, I guess?
It does. And honestly, I want you to preach more, because it seems to me what you're wrestling with is this ultimate paradox then of what is the will? Is it possible to have a will that aligns all other wills? In some sense, it seems like you're positing the chaos, the flux, the uh, immortal change. Immortal but not eternal. I don't know if that's even correct. What it seems like you're positing is almost a paradoxical aesthetic, that things need to both be and not be, that you need to both be attached to but not held back by your trajectory, that you need to be able to radically alter yourself without radically losing yourself. Is there an inherent paradox in this view you're building out, or is there some hidden synthesis that I don't see yet?
Though I do not embody the Hegelian dialectic entirely, there is an essence of truth to it, in the sense that you can have this synthesis of things. One of the things I was talking about in my last podcast was we were talking about the state and the sort of Aristotelian and Hegelian view as the state as necessary for freedom, which sounds kind of crazy because our modern conception of the state is this sort of constraining thing that takes your money through taxes. It forces you to follow certain laws. I I have to follow. I have to get my car registered. I got pulled over recently, got a ticket because I didn't register my car on time. You think of the state as this constraining thing.
Yeah.
Now, from a material perspective, obviously the state does free us in a lot of ways, because now we're no longer in that chaotic state of nature where we have to focus on all aspects of survival. Because without that social contract, obviously you have to focus on food, protection, building your house, watching your children. How are you going to do all that? Division of labor, all this. It is necessary from a material perspective to free you. And also within that freeing, you also make yourself subservient to the greater whole.
Hmm.
So there is that clashing there. But from the state on a metaphysical level, I also think there is freedom. And the freedom on a metaphysical level is now you have something that you're a part of that lives on after you. You have a tapestry which you can contribute to. And I think another essay I'm going to end up doing, probably in contention to Deleuze and Foucault and all these post-structuralists, is actually positing the state as a work of art and empire as a work of art, because there's a continuity now, which is a means of making your life more meaningful than just the temporal. Because now you have something you're a part of that's going to live on after you, and that echoes your life through eternity, however small. Sometimes it's small vibrations, sometimes it's large vibrations if you're a Caesar or a Buddha or a George Washington. But essentially the state can free us as well. So I think there is, I don't like to say middle ground, because, okay, where do we put the middle point? But there is a synthesis, there is a nuance to all of this. And I think this is what something Giorgiani does really well with novel folklore. The need to have a mythos to inspire ethic of the future. We cannot just deconstruct. This is why the monumental view of history is important. We're not antiquarian. We're not going back to the past and saying that this mythic golden age is something we have to return to, and that we're just in the dark age, the Kali Yuga right now. We're not saying that. We're also not being the deconstructivists like Deleuze or Foucault or even Baudrillard, who, especially Baudrillard, who are just breaking down every sort of nomos, every sort of custom as enslaving. Yes, it is enslaving to a certain degree, but in servitude is also freedom. The work will set you free. No, that's a joke, obviously. But no. But what I'm getting at here is you do sacrifice certain things, but you also gain certain things. There is a sacrifice and a gain to all of this. Freedom is not just this sort of binary concept where there's freedom and unfreedom. There is a synthesis in all these different things which come together, and you can't just constrain tyranny to the simple definition, right? So there is this almost dialectic going on.
I think that all ties in that point about the state being a necessary, if I might even call it a sacrificial altar, and that part of what we are living through is in abundance, to Bataille's point, of potential focal points. And that's what I see you piecing together in almost a constellation like fashion. What you are calling radical aesthetics is a new constellation in the sky, it would seem to me, because you are picking out all these individual pieces and sacrificing the rest and building upon their corpses. But just to kind of ground us more, back to your essay, knowledge of temporality forces the question upon us: how do we confront death? Do you want to read this quote from Bataille that you chose out?
Absolutely. The horror we feel at the thought of death, the desire for death, and the anguish of the individual confronting the general continuity of existence. These are the sources of our erotic fevers and our sacred experiences. Man is not only a discontinuous being, but he is aware of his discontinuity, and this awareness is anguish. The need to lose ourselves in continuity, to expend our excess in the face of death, drives us to acts of transgression.
And that speaks to me. The myth of the river of Lethe is, I think, the pronunciation in the Greek mythology, where after you die, you are subject to a rebirth of some kind, but before you come back, you have to drink from this river that makes you forget all of your past life.
I'm not
I don't.
familiar with that.
I think it's from the myth of but I might be misremembering the direct quotation there. It was something that I want to say Socrates references at some point, or Plato through Socrates, but uh, it seems like there is a deep resonance here between, and I don't know if Bataille ever makes it directly, between Eros and the being, the becoming, and this idea that, we are discontinuous. Does that discontinuity have to be actual, or can it be a simulation? Can that discontinuity be forced on us by amnesia, like suggested by the River of Lethe? This was a general question for your viewpoint. Does it matter whether death, the finality of death, is real? Or if we are living through some kind of trick, does that change how you would become?
Well, I'll answer it this way, like a politician, indirectly. But Bataille's view of our return through death is that we become part of this process again. We become death isn't really it's an end of that being, that conscious being, but it's sort of like this is just my interpretation. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm misunderstanding Bataille, but this return through death is sort of like a Buddhist reincarnation in a sense. It's kind of a samsara. When we die, our energy, of course, goes back into the greater whole and it's redistributed towards other things. Our conscious being ends, but then we're back into this process. Our corpses will feast, or they'll be feasted upon by insects and bugs, and will fertilize the land, and from that land something will grow again. It's sort of this the cycle of life in Lion King, but
Rules
reincarnation to
us
the
all.
Buddhist. There we go. Reincarnation to the Buddhist isn't a actual reincarnation of the soul, because there is no soul. There is anatta, no self in Buddhism. There is no soul in Buddhism, so there isn't a direct reincarnation of a conscious entity. It's more so that everything we do impacts that after us. And that sort of movement of our energy becomes redirected, and it pushes something and propels another thing, which propels another thing. And I think that when I talk about the state as this sort of evolving work of art, or imperium, or just things that are not constrained within the temporal, long projects across time, it could be writing of history, it could be literature, all these different things. We are moved by the past. And one of the most important things, we skipped over the Icarus part, obviously, because we sort of covered that in the last thing. But I think one of the things I didn't really mention, maybe I did. Well, I did mention it, but I'll just bring it up again because it's relevant, is the Achilles is real, you are not. Achilles did not likely exist, and yet he is more influential on the now than, let's say, somebody who is a verified figure of history. Let's say, for example, the Duke of Wellington. Still a very great man of history. Obviously, he defeated Napoleon in the Battle of Waterloo. Or actually, let's go even further. Let's go to like Jimmy Carter, who just passed away. Jimmy Carter is not as real as Achilles is. He is real. He is remembered. He's a part of history. We know he existed. But Achilles' name rings stronger and more true in terms of influence onto people's lives, especially throughout history. And even today, people read about Achilles, or they watch the film Troy, and they're just astounded, they're amazed. So this figure, who may not have actually existed, is reincarnated in his influence on eternity. So the point being that you don't even have to be a real person to be immortal in a cosmic sense. But take Alexander the Great and all the people that he inspired throughout his life, or Julius Caesar, and even today, these people have reincarnated, and they have returned to that flow of death because the energy expended throughout their lives has been echoed in various mediums even today. So that's in. Is that a good politician's answer to your question? Sort of answers it, but not really.
Warrior philosopher for president 2028. If it wasn't ASI, sorry, Warrior. But yes, it
I'm not
does.
running for president. We're marching on Washington in
You
Minecraft. In Minecraft, just like Mussolini did on
you're
Rome.
gonna be
Just
part of
kidding.
that
In
ASI
Minecraft.
for
In
president
Minecraft.
takeover. I can feel it
That's
in
right. That's right.
Minecraft. It's gonna happen. We need phalanxes. We need Spartan warriors. But to your point there, do you see the great chain of being, or the beings, capital B, lowercase b? Do you see that extending infinitely in a chain? Would you say that there is a never-ending, almost Russian nesting doll of those kind of relationships, or is there an ultimate synthesis that can be summed up in one's own self?
There's no synthesis that could be summed up, but there are different ways to view continuity, because if humanity was wiped off the face of the earth and off the face of the cosmos, who would be there to remember us? There's lots of ways you could imagine a timeline, assuming multiverses, assuming a parent running our simulation doesn't exist. You can imagine a timeline where we're forgotten to history, where we nuke ourselves to oblivion, and billions of years from now, or even when the sun dies, that maybe every trace of our existence is wiped off. So then, in that case, you can sort of say our being is done. People no longer remember Achilles, because and that's a lot of things that leftists say that I really don't like. They say, "Well, Achilles isn't going to be remembered. You're not going to be remembered because we're all going to die one day, and eventually the universe is going to collapse." Blah blah blah. Maybe that's true, but the great existential struggle, and this is why my existentialism is superior to Sartre and Camus. They just want this sort of passive rebellion. In the end of my essay, I say, Baudrillard, with a little bit of courage, create your hyper reality. Try to create that eternity, however it may happen. But now, on another level, I don't think that timeline is real. I think we probably are in an ancestor simulation, and we have a parent simulator. So they have access to all our raw data, and that's going to be stored somewhere. And that might inspire them. I mean, why are they running the simulations? Maybe they are doing it for inspiration. Maybe it's a video game to them. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But I do think on some level, our existence will be recorded somewhere. In that case, everything we've ever done, jerking off in your room one day. Yeah, someone knows about that, man. Somebody knows the weird shit you're looking at online, you little fucking pervert weirdo. So everything we do is recorded somehow. That's how I view it. Of course, if you're a Christian, you would say God sees all. He sees you doing your weird shit. But from my perspective, because I do believe we are in an ancestor simulation, I'm actually going to start doing some research into this, and maybe provide my own schizo theory for reality, which will, of course, be disproven one day. But you got to make theories to be disproven to help science move along. So I'll do my piece. But I do think that there is a continuity, and even if humanity were to nuke ourselves into oblivion, I believe all that data would be recorded somewhere. And our parent simulator is also probably part of an ancestor simulation, probably an infinite loop of ancestor simulations. And one day, if we make it past the point of nuking, we're going to create ancestor simulations. So it's just a never-ending loop. So yeah, I don't think that you can ever really get rid of that continuity. There will always be something, and you could say that's a synthesis, but to me, that's not really a synthesis. It's not really a universal theory. But yeah, I think we are going to be continuous in the sense that there's never going to be a complete deletion of that energy, if that makes sense. And if the laws of thermodynamics are true, then you literally can't delete those recordings of energy. But anyway, I digress.
No, I think it's right on point because, I mean, we'll get more into it as we go through the essay. But one of the things I heard you say there, and referencing your previous comment about needing to be schizophrenic at some points, it's like it's almost that madness that is the gate. Is it the madness of disconnected, incomprehensible realities, or is it the madness of death, of living every day as if you are not going to die, knowing that you actually will die some point? Like it's this kind of contradictory necessity that seems to
Yeah.
me a big part of what you're crafting out here.
Really quick, just before we move on, just before I
Please.
forget, this is sort of what Deleuze is positing in Anti-Oedipus, with the idea of the body without organs to sort of represent the schizophrenic, and that society actually progresses because of the schizophrenic, because of he who acts outside of utility. And of course, D&G, that's Deleuze and Guattari, I believe his name is pronounced, were highly influenced by Bataille, and his idea of anti-utilitarian excess and dispensation of energy. So all these things are tied together. So sort of, I think what you're saying is you have to be a little schizophrenic sometimes. You can be too schizophrenic, like maybe what Deleuze and all these post-structuralists are sort of asserting. But you do need a certain level of anti-utilitarian thought, anti-dogmatic thought, things that are not rooted in the archetypes. But I think you can go too far from that as well. So I didn't mean to stop you from moving on, but I just wanted to briefly put that in because I would forget. I'm very forgetful. That's why I write things down so I don't forget. Anyway.
Please inject away. And that is, it's almost like you mentioned Aristotle's phenomenology here at some point, where his division of causes. And it seems like, referencing back to the social suicide motif that you had talked about before, where engaging with society is in some sense an obliviation of the self. One way around that is to aim at a higher goal than the society can comprehend, in such a way where you are furthering the social ends, but that does not result in your eventual displacement. Like with Achilles, he went to war for his king, right? Um, Even though he knew he was going to die, if you said that first part without the second part, that he would be inflamed in the stars, that he would be driven to immortality through that sacrifice, that looks like a crazy choice. Why would you go and cut off a life that could be very long lived in order to serve a king for a woman that you're never going to be able to possess yourself?
Just to slightly
Please.
not to be, well, actually, technically
Well,
Achilles
actually, maybe.
himself. Well, he was technically the king of Pythia.
No, that's
Agamemnon was just a stronger king, and of course his brother, Menelaus, Helen of Troy, blah blah. So they were all kings technically, but yes, Agamemnon was the strongest, most powerful king in Greece. But I just wanted to briefly say, like, Achilles was there for selfish reasons, and that's precisely why we should celebrate him. He was not there for Agamemnon; he was there for immortal glories. That's explicitly outlined in the Iliad, right? So it's not really service to even Greece or service to Agamemnon, because of course the nation state doesn't even exist yet. The city state doesn't even exist yet, really. Like, we're still at a point of monarchies for the most part in Greece. But I just wanted to, not to be that guy, but just to.
No, my specific knowledge is incredibly lacking. So please, well, actually, me in any sense there. But it does seem like, Agamemnon, I couldn't even remember his name when I was talking about the myth there specifically, but Achilles is unforgettable. So
There
it's
we go. Hey,
interesting.
maybe that's proving my essay further, right?
There we go. Our existential angst is born both out of the knowledge of death and the ability to accumulate excess. Lower beings operate on a spectrum of simple to complex inputs and outputs in response to stimuli, structured as technic by both their biological composition and their instincts. A being can only act in a utilitarian manner, as they both lack the awareness to operate beyond their biology and the ability to accumulate excess. Even in possession of excess, a domesticated animal or pet, a being does not possess the ability to dispense of that excess. Thus, all actions of a being must serve a utilitarian purpose, even for the individual organism or its species. We don't have to go too far down this rabbit hole if you don't find it on topic, but this did make me think of the subject I'm obsessed with, artificial intelligence. A lot of people say that once AI comes to power, it will treat us as pets. It will
Mm.
domesticate us to its interests. And this seems incredibly topical here as whether or not that would be a good or bad future for us. Does that seem likely? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing with land contra Giorgiani, Giorgiani contra land, is how are we going to interact with AGI? To land, we're sort of subservient to its will, and to Giorgiani, we find a way to synthesize ourselves, which is, of course, my position. I want to become a cyborg. I'm Patrick the Cyborg Soltikov. Uh, so yeah, that is a big question to be brought up. Is there's two things from that. Do we cease to be uppercase beings, or do we just become the lower uppercase being to their higher uppercase being? I think it's probably going to be the latter. We are going to be still beings, but we're going to be lower uppercase beings, or would be uppercase beings lower on the pole to them, because we're still going to be aware of our temporality. Uh, we're still going to be aware of all these things. So yeah, it is something to bring up. Like, how is our being going to be with a being, capital B, potentially higher than us? Absolutely.
Well, it seems like what you're saying there is not only, well, yeah, maybe our position relative to like the global world or the ancestor simulation that we're aware of change will be subservient to something in a way it doesn't seem we are now. But our position on the pole itself is still going to move up. Like that
Hmm.
is the cyborg process. Our abilities, our conceptualizations, our schizo possibilities still advance. And it is that advance we should be concerned about rather than hierarchical. Like better to be first, better to be second to the God Emperor than first in the pigsty. Does that resonate?
Yes, however, I will say, if for example, it might take 50 to 100 years to get to AGI, but we could ensure that we were not overtaken by AGI,
Mm.
versus saying we could have AGI in 10 years but overtakes us. I would take the 50 to 100 years, because self preservation comes into play. Obviously, I want to progress. I want to move up, but I don't want to do it at the expense of losing our will. The only time you should ever make that sacrifice, if it's to the point where you're preserving something really decrepit and decayed and it has to go. I don't think humanity has to go. I think we just have to evolve. But in relation to AGI and all these things, no, we should have a certain bit of caution in how that develops, which is where Heidegger's question on the essence of technology can be aptly applied to this issue that we have. So while I agree with you, I also would put that caveat in if you're understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah, God bless. The caveats are what I'm here for. And it does seem like you come to this at some sense in this next section. Man confronts anguish in a variety of ways, the majority of which deny life and the sublime in some capacity. Those who believe in an afterlife confront death by denying it and asserting the primacy of the eternal over the temporal. The immortal soul resolves the fear of death by negating its finality. The reductionist who denies the eternal seeks to ignore the fear and finality of death through the excess of pleasure and comfort. Without care for the future, they embrace the temporal as something merely to extract pleasurable stimuli from. Lacking vision of a transcendent future, they live only for that which they can benefit from within the finitude of their individual lives. And I say that because it seems like the person who is reductionist, they're seeking only pleasure in their life, they're the ones who would say, yes, supplant me with the AGI in 10 years, even if it means we lose control, because I just want to experience that, or I want to know that our will is even overtaken in some way, that the pleasure that I seek is fulfilled in that sense. Whereas on the other side, that eternity of the human spirit, if we could delay somehow AGI 50 years into the future, but know that our preferences, our sense of self continues in some way, that would be that path. Is there a middle path between the two, do you think? Like, is that the melding, the cyborg melding that you were talking about? Or is that not really intention?
Yeah, cyborg melding. Also, what I had to say about the ascetic path, the eternal soul negating.
Hmm.
In some ways, I could apply that to some. Sometimes you talk about AGI sort of representing God. That to me would be also basically what I'm illustrating with the first point is Camus' social suicide. So choosing a
I
preordained
see.
doctrine which negates death in some way. If you're
Hmm.
creating AGI to be your God, that also is a form of cope. That also is a form of essentially giving up your agency so that you don't have to deal with this existential angst. So you can see both of those paths as illustrating this thing that I'm bringing up. But yeah,
Yeah.
the middle path is obviously we have to progress. Obviously, I'm not a luddite. Obviously, I am for the future, but I want to do so in a way where I retain my agency, where I retain humanity, and also I would say it's essential for beauty because I don't know that. Here's another question: is even once you get AGI, can AGI act outside of utility? And if it does act outside of utility, is it fundamentally doing something unique to humans? Is it fundamentally being in such a way as a human
Hmm.
being is? Because the way that a program works currently, everything it does is for a purpose. Everything it does is to fulfill a sort of utilitarian aim.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, I can see that very easily evolving over time, but even for the sake of beauty, for the sake of art, for the sake of creating outside of inputs and outputs, I think it's necessary that we remain in the driver's seat, not to conserve, but to ensure that whatever we move towards retains that wonder and that dispensation towards glorious operation, as Bataille would posit. And by the way, Bataille was very anti-technology, which is interesting, which I'm not, but it's worth noting.
Yeah, I wonder how the ancestor simulation brought about Bataille, honestly. Uh, I on the topic of AGI creating God, I don't think that's possible. I think that might be where things are going, but I don't think it's ever going to be a point that the AGI is able to itself reach. I don't know. Maybe more on that another time. But uh, others still deny the eternal, yet seek an aesthetic path to confront it. The Buddhist perception of life as suffering born from craving and the cycle of samsara proposed the solution to the temporal life is denying it and seeking its cessation. What is common in these paths is their fundamental denial of life and the sublime, either out of fear or the inability to project and assert one's will to power upon reality. And this is, I think, what I was missing before, is that is fundamentally because they see the no self as the actual self. Like, by reifying anything within one's own life, you are reifying that illusion. You need to just cease. Is that accurate?
If you view life as suffering and you view as life as something to escape, because life is viewed as perpetuating the samsara, and of course the goal of nibbana. And by the way, in Buddhist theology, the Buddha himself is actually denying himself nibbana so that he can continually reincarnate and continually guide people to the path of enlightenment. And of course, the Buddhists, well, some Buddhists would say that the Dalai Lama is a reincarnation of Siddhartha Gautama. So, but ultimately, for most people, salvation comes in the form of, honestly, this is kind of funny. It's almost like Jesus dying for our sins and original sin. The Buddha chooses not to experience nibbana. That's a form of sacrifice to lead to the salvation of everyone else, which is interesting. Yeah. Maybe there's some connection there syncretically, but
very much so, I think.
Yeah, but with nibbana, it's about escaping from life, denying life. So yeah, it's viewing life as the bad, to be escaped, to be enlightened from, to experience moksha from. So yeah, I guess I'm basically saying, yeah, I agree.
There is one thing about that Christian parallel. I think Christ necessitates Antichrist in a big way, like in the way that Christ sacrifices himself so that others might receive salvation, so our sins might be forgiven. There is also the requisite being who must sin to earn that sacrifice, to require that sacrifice to a degree that no one else can. Is there an Antichrist figure in Buddhism in that same way? Or is Buddha maybe the Antichrist in that way, that he is perpetually breaking the one rule, so to speak, that he is returning and not giving into Nibbana?
I don't know. I mean, that's at that point, I just wouldn't answer that question, because I think that's a fundamental flaw of both Buddhism and Christianity, because they're positing a value to life. Life is something to be overcome in some way, where I don't think there is a value to life. Life is what it is. It's neither inherently or intrinsically good or bad. It is. Reality can't be intrinsically good or bad by definition. Reality is reality, unless you're positing the whole thing with, the Abrahamic God. Well, everything that comes out of God is good, and then the bad is just straying away from God. To me, maybe they're right, and I just can't understand it because I'm a mere mortal. But to me, it seems like a logical inconsistency, and I would say that reality can neither be good or bad. Therefore, if reality can be neither good or bad, then you don't really have to answer the question of, does Christ need an antichrist? Does the Buddha need an antichrist figure? Because I just reject their entire premise altogether. So I personally won't answer that question, because I don't think it's a question that needs to be answered, if that makes sense.
Patrick the politician, once again. No, it does. The Christian, Muslim, Jew, or even Hindu preach a return to the Logos, or some form of theosis to negate temporality, asserting the primacy of the eternal essence of God for the Abrahamics, the Brahmin, and Brahman for the Hindus. This return to an essence more powerful than themselves is a method of attaching a universal transcendent path to one without the power to attain triumphs within the temporal life. The reductionist, motivated out of the same fear, numbs and narcotizes his existential anguish with the material. Lastly, the Buddhists and many more other phenomenological ascetics accept the reality of temporality, but often due to an inability to assert themselves powerfully within that reality, or plagued by the guilt of the master, as experienced by Siddhartha. See Death and No Return, Nibbana, also known as Nirvana. A cessation of all life and rebirth as the path to enlightenment. I mean, I think what you were saying there is a very, previously what you were saying to that passage summarizes the why of what you put this in here for, but is there anything else you want to expound on that part?
No, I think, what I said before pretty much, yeah.
Though still trapped within a dogma of existence, the pagan pathologizing of the afterlife is far more life affirming. with a hierarchy of rewards after death, which are earned through action during one's life. Both hell and the fields of asphodel contain the majority of souls in the Nordic and Hellenic pagan religions. Valhalla and Elysium are reserved for those who lived gloriously. The lack of a universal paradise after death necessitates that man lives magnificently and in a manner unequal to his peers. He must be superior to his fellow man, and thus inequality is the essential characteristic that births beauty out of its dialectic opposition to the ugly. Nietzsche refers to this as the pathos of distance in Beyond Good and Evil. And this is maybe my question for you that strays outside the boundaries of the specific topic a little bit. But if you had advice to give to someone who does find themselves in hell or the fields of asphodel, what would that be? What would you tell that lowercase being?
Tough luck, man. No, assuming you can get out of the fields of asphodel or hell.
Should they
Well, actually, I
try?
say
Should
I
they
think
try?
I think so long as you're conscious, you can escape. Because obviously, I don't agree with the premise of
Interesting.
hell or the fields of asphodel. Because I'm just saying that this is the pagan afterlife is a better representation of how we should act in life.
Yeah.
But I still, of course, reject that. So long as you're conscious, you always have a fighting chance to do something. Unless you're like, unless you have no motor skills and you're just a vegetable, then tough luck. Fuck, I got spit right there. Tough luck. I don't know what the fuck you're gonna do if you're conscious. That's probably the scariest thing is like being in your own coffin, knowing you exist but not being able to do anything. At that point, tough luck. Then at that point, tough it out, man. Like find some. I don't know. You're not. I can't give any advice to that guy, but to the normal person who still has the ability to assert themselves somehow, even if it's very difficult. Awareness. Be aware of your situation first. You only know you're in hell if you know you're in hell. You can only escape hell if you know you're in hell. You can only escape a prison if you know the prison exists. And most people don't know that the prison exists. What they tell addicts is the first thing you have to do is admit you have a problem. And that applies to any sort of improvement, right? From the very base level of like, get up in the morning, take your cold showers, go to the gym, blah, blah, all that bullshit. That exists on a higher level too. You have to recognize, for example, it's Plato's allegory of the cave. You have to know that you're in the cave. But then even after you get out of the cave, what Baudrillard would say is that what comes after the cave is also an illusion. You have to escape that too. So there's just multiple layers of ignorance that we have to peel. But you have to be prepared to peel those away. And maybe you're even incapable of peeling it away, but you know that there's another veil of ignorance that exists. Maybe you can't confront that, but just by knowing it's there, that's going to change your whole ability to be in the world as a capital being. So I guess awareness, be aware. And that's why we read philosophy. That's why you study. That's why you experience phenomena. It's to increase and heighten your awareness of what reality is, what existence is. And that's why we read physics. Physics is always changing, but read it, understand what the current perception of reality is. And that's going to ground you to be able to build your worldview and therefore to act on it.
Eternal discontentment, even with nirvana, is that radical aesthetics?
Discontentment, how?
The perception that there is another veil. There is always another veil. You're never pulling back the final curtain.
It's well, always pull back what you see in front of you. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, at a certain point, are we ever going to be able to escape this ancestor simulation? Probably not, because we're programmed not to. But you do everything that you can within that sort of infinite sphere. The sphere is infinite. A circle is infinite. You might still be stuck in that bubble, but within that, maybe the bubble's expanding too. That's another thing. View the simulation as an expanding sphere. The sphere can get bigger. You can always increase your limits, but you might never be able to escape the bubble, right? Because you are part of an ancestor simulation. So what I'm getting at there is not discontentment, but it's eternally. You may be Sisyphus. That's where Camus is right. If you are Sisyphus and you literally can't escape the boulder, then it is tough luck. You're going to have to do everything you can within the confines of where you exist. Or if you're the vegetable, right, then you're going to have to try to find some meaning by being a vegetable. It's going to be really fucking hard. But to whatever ability that you can be, do it. Be to the furthest limits of however you can be. And then if you reach those limits, like you genuinely reach those limits, and you literally can't go any further, you're gonna have to accept that as reality. Or maybe you die in the pursuit of trying to break those limits, and then maybe that's a beautiful thing too. But it's not discontentment. It's being realistic and being as unrealistic as you can within what we know of reality, but also to know that there is something beyond that. And by
Mm.
knowing there's something beyond that, maybe we don't know what is beyond that. Um, we might be able to learn about that. If we're in an ancestor simulation, we might be able to learn. We might be able to escape the ancestor simulation. But if we can't still live to the furthest limits that you can within our limitations while trying to escape the simulation. But don't be upset or discontented because you can't escape the simulation. Like think about the people who wanted to go to the moon. Maybe you were born in 19 or maybe you were born in like 1850 and you didn't live in time to go to the moon. That's tough luck. But don't be discontented by that. Do everything you can within limitations of your current context. Uh, yeah, I mean, you get what I'm saying?
I think so. There was an image that came to me as you were saying that, in that, the person who is content with living for the pleasures of the moment, if they are in a bubble, an ever expanding bubble, it's not just that they're slowly sinking back towards that center point, which maybe you could conceive of as hell in some way, uh, deepening depth, but that center point is getting further and further from the edges. They're not
Hmm.
just standing still, they are diminishing in some way. But a person who is chasing the eternal is almost moving in a direction, but it's circular, it's self eating. It's this idea that they will be able to relive, to enjoy the things that they have always enjoyed. So they are in a direction, but that too is in an ever expanding bubble, shrinking towards the center. What you're saying is bust out. You have to be constantly chasing the direction of that expansion.
Yeah, more or less.
God bless. The choice of Achilles is the pursuit of the sublime, that eternal direction, confined within temporality, a heroically existential assertion of the will to touch eternity through action. The historical existence of Achilles is questionable, and yet Achilles is more real as a figure which drives and influences history than the sleepwalker of modernity, who lacks both true awareness and genuine agency. Thus, the popular phrase, Achilles is real, you are not, demonstrates existence in relation to the sublime, where the nominal surpasses even the substantial and real in transcendent regard. The quality of life is not constrained to temporality, with the historical progress of existence venerating the authors and artists of its tapestry, a cosmic Babel whose architects are remembered in the bricks laid during its climb and ascension into the heavens. Quality of life, therefore, is not its longevity, but the echoes of its actions throughout eternity and its contributions to the Promethean character of man's progress towards that something more which lies at the elusive and unfixed end of the excess dispense for the purpose of witnessing brief yet terrific flashes into the sublime, into the mysteries of the ever revealed flux cosmos. Are you familiar with that? I think it's a rabbinic reading of the Tower of Babel, where the reason God got so angry at them was because somebody carrying a stone up to the top of the tower, if they tripped and fell and the stone
Hmm.
fell and they died, uh, the builders would be more sad about the lost brick than they would the lost person.
Interesting.
Well,
I haven't
I
heard about that.
I love what you said there about the builders, the people who are contributing those bricks. Even if they die, they are remembered in the stone, which is a very
Oh yeah.
interesting contra reading there. It seems like. Do you want to read this next section, or did you have anything you want to say about that last one?
No, I think our conversation, like we kind of covered that before getting there, so I think we're good on that one.
No. The accursed share. Man's ability to accumulate and dispense excess abundance forces him to choose the method of such dispensation beyond a utilitarian appropriation of energy. The modern attempts to rationalize the economy and reduce it to a science which determines ideal formulas of directing the efforts and activity of labor. In my previous essay, Being and Becoming, I argue that science provides us the is and the how, but not the what and the why. Both Marxism and capitalism fail to answer the question of man's existential eggs, believing both in their own ways that a correct method exists rationally in which an economy can benefit its constituents materially. I know you are coming up on a boundary. Do you want to like run through the rest of this, or do you want to keep digging in more? Maybe do a part 2. I don't know how you're feeling.
I got like 25 more minutes I could do. Or
Cool, cool,
what time
cool.
is it right now? Yeah, like 20 more minutes. But I could just briefly. I think that sort of with this, what we're getting at is the idea that man does have a non-utilitarian necessity to live life, or there's like a non-utilitarian way that he must be in the world, because once we can accumulate excess and abundance, then we have to dispense of that excess and abundance. And we can go to the Bataille quote after this to illustrate that. But all I was trying to say with this thing, and then even in that Evola quote, which I don't need to read that out, but
Please.
essentially what it's talking about is that Marxism fails in that it's essentially just trying to fulfill a material solution that already gets fulfilled with capitalism. Because as we see, even the poorest worker in a capitalist society is superior to that of the average in a communist society. This is why The Grapes of Wrath was initially shown as a propaganda film in the Soviet Union until the viewers realized that the family in The Grapes of Wrath had a car, and they're like, "Where are our cars?" Right? So because capitalism still ends up fulfilling that basic necessity, then the material interests for the workers in Marxism fail to be of import. So there's no transcendent goal that you should be a Marxist for, because if it's constrained to the material, which Marxism is, and I think that's where the post-structuralists and post-Marxists are attempting to refine Marxism, but it doesn't address the sublime in a substantive way. And really, in the next part of that quote, which I cut out for brevity, essentially said that the only problem that the Marxists really have is that there's inequality, right? But then, so then it's like, do we want to be equally shitty? Would we rather be equally shitty in a Marxist society, which it never ends up being, because obviously you still have a hierarchy. It's just unspoken. But would you rather want to be equally shitty, or do you want to be like actually living better than the shitty, but there's someone above you, which kind of indirectly goes into some stuff we talked about earlier, but it's not super important. I guess all I wanted to say there: communism, capitalism, two sides of the same coin. They fulfill a material purpose in practice, but that leaves the question of anti-utilitarian dispensation of energy and of being. And what do we do?
Hmm. I don't get how you're saying that the capitalist is the flip side of the coin there exactly. It's very close, but I can't quite touch it.
So the reason why it's two sides of the same coin is because, as we establish here, in a Marxist utopia, everybody would be equal materially.
Yeah.
They would have their basic living necessities, their utilitarian needs fulfilled, but
Wanting.
there would be no yeah,
No
there'd be no
arrows almost.
orientation. Sure, there'd be no orientation towards how do we attain the sublime. There's no answer to that. The same way that in capitalism, you have a method of practice to be able to achieve utopia in a material sense, uh, with quality of life raising. But once you get to that point of quality of life, there's no answer, or there's no
Ah,
even proposition of what do we do once
yeah.
we have our utilitarian needs fulfilled. There's no answer to the sublime. And this is where Bataille comes in, because it says, well, we have to expend of our energy in ways that are not productive, because once you reach the productive limits, what do? And that energy will destroy you from the inside. And this is why I bring up Fight Club and different aspects of modernity.
Hmm. To Bataille's full quote there. Thank you. That makes a lot more sense. Incomprehension does not change the final outcome in the slightest. We can ignore or forget the fact that the ground we live on is little other than a field of multiple destructions. Our ignorance only has this incontestable effect. It causes us to undergo what we could bring about in our own way, if we understood. It deprives us of the choice of an exudation that might suit us.
Exudation. Yeah.
Exudation. Above all, it consigns men in their works to catastrophic destruction. For if we do not have the force to destroy the surplus energy ourselves, it cannot be used. And like an unbroken animal that cannot be trained, it is this energy that destroys us. It is we who pay the price of the inevitable explosion. There's a lot of talk back to like the AI point about mammon being what is driving us, or excuse me, Moloch being what is
Mm.
driving us towards AI. Moloch being like the ancient Phoenician god of sacrifice, of
Yeah.
sacrificing your children. And
Storm
it's,
God too.
yes, exactly. Discharge of power is very interesting there. Um, but it seems to me what Bataille is bringing up here is almost another Phoenician deity, Beelzebub, Beelzebub, the Lord of the Flies, as the Jews derisively called him, the Lord of Dung. But it almost seems like what Bataille is saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm putting this out there because I'm not positive
Mhm.
on it, but that if we don't destroy that excess, it almost is left to fester in a way that Beelzebub comes to feast on, and then that creates pestilence, that creates the explosion of refuse.
Maybe on a meta level, I mean, literally, it's not that the excess will destroy us in the sense that if you leave, like, crops out and they rot and then it attracts rats, which bring diseases. It's not like that, but it's more so that if we live only for utility, it's going to lead, and I bring this up later in the essay, if you live only for utility, and let's say utility is eating, having things like having a roof over your head, having
Mm,
sex. What's the ultra utilitarian method, the excess utilitarian method of consuming these things? Well, it's becoming fat. It's a caloric surplus that you don't need anymore. For sex, it's pornography, living only for the fix. When you have too much of it, when you have too much possession, you end up with a house full of things you don't need. These are all extensions of utility, extended to an excess of utility, rather than an
mm,
excess of non-productive means. Like art is not productive in the sense that it doesn't fulfill an immediate purpose. Same with things like the moon landings, right? That doesn't fulfill an immediate purpose. It was for a propaganda victory, a spiritual victory, so to speak, over the Soviet Union. Now we can argue
interesting.
that there was a material to it as well because we were trying to defeat our enemy. Maybe you can say that. You could say that, but with art, certainly there's a non-utilitarian dispensation of the excess energy, of course, with the Aztecs and the sacrifice of humans, which is something that Bataille brings up. There's no purpose for that, but it fulfills this sort of frenzied angst in humanity. It fulfills this sort of this desire for honor. Let's say there is honor in those things. There is ritual in those things. The festival is something that Bataille brings up as well. You need these things that don't have a productive purpose, but they actually expand the limitations of what we can do, because you
Mm,
begin to assert something beyond utility, and now that's what we evolve. We evolve to meet these extended limits, and that's where power comes into play. And I bring it up in an essay: will to power over will to life. If you live only for life, you stay as the cockroach that survives perfectly, but you become more complex beings, more susceptible to nature to kill you, because humans can die in a variety of ways, and our lives are wasteful when we die. It's not like a cockroach. If that dies, well, the cockroach has hundreds of babies, right? You're human. You hold a human in your body for 9 months and you give birth. That baby dies. That's an incredible waste of energy. So purely from a position of utility and survival, humans don't really stand as the best being, let's say lowercase being in this case, to fulfill that will to life. You would think of a million other types of lowercase beings that survive better than we do. If there's nuclear fallout, what's going to survive? Right? It's going to be those lower forms of beings, not the higher forms of beings. So it's like essentially saying that the driving force of life isn't utility, it's power, it's will to power. It's expanding the limitations of what we can do in life through non-productive pursuits. The productive will never allow us to evolve or expand and advance. It's an existential question. It's asserting value and meaning which don't actually exist.
mm.
Um, and by asserting that, now we've given ourselves a new direction to orient and to advance towards. If we live only for fulfillment of utility, then there is nothing driving us towards more, towards the stars, so to speak.
The stars are destination. I think
There we go.
that's very apt. When there is no longer a clear answer to where we must expend our resources, namely survival in the state of nature where abundance is absent, we must intentionally dispense of our excess or be destroyed by it. In times of peace, the warlike man destroys himself. Would you agree with the statement that energy is never wasted? At worst, it's only internally directed then? Did I hear you right on that last part?
Depends how you define waste. If you define waste as, to your detriment, then you could say that's waste. If you say waste as in, well, obviously, let's say the second law of thermodynamics, like this stuff is going somewhere. Yes, it is going somewhere. But
Yeah.
waste here defined as it's going somewhere that is to our detriment, let's say.
Interesting. Man is inherently warlike, inherently striving and desiring. The last man emerges out of the reductionist pacification of this striving. In abundance comes out of excess accumulated beyond necessity and utility. Thus, it can only be dispensed non-utilitarianly. Excess accumulated produces a distorted amalgamation of the will. The last man transforms the will into an inward reckoning. Modernity is a coffin constructed around us. Once we outgrow the coffin, we become further constrained and crushed by it. It squeezes us tighter the more we struggle, like Procrustes' rope. Excess, not directed towards the creation of new value through art, expansion, and transcendence, leads to the modern economic man, who attempts to fill the gaps of his desire with more utility. He becomes the narrator in Fight Club who develops the IKEA nesting instinct, surrounding himself, copying himself, it seems like, with material he doesn't need. The consumer attempts to replicate utility through the accumulation of more than what he needs. In an excess of survival necessities, he grows obese from caloric surplus. His dopamine receptors are fried through virtual pornography. His bones grow fragile from osteoporosis, and his muscles frail from atrophy, all because of the cycle of utilitarian behavior. We must break free of utility to grow. Growth and evolution does not come from utility or fulfilling our biological needs. It comes from expanding the limits of what we can do. It comes from transvaluing life beyond utility, nature, and biology, by imposing order onto the flux driven by a desire to feel exhilaration and taste deliciously. If evolution were merely Darwinian, we would not develop as such complex uppercase B beings susceptible to the luxurious waste of death. I love that. The luxurious waste of death. That's just such a cool turn of phrase. This transvaluing life from beyond utility. Can you speak more about that? I wasn't sure I caught the full meaning when I was going through, and you bring it up a couple of times.
Yeah, I kind of said it, in the previous little stanza, but it's essentially that if you live only for utility, if you live only for purpose that's clearly outlined biologically and naturally, then you're not going to advance because you're going to reach a threshold where you do fulfill those basic survival needs, and you're going to say, well, what now? What then? Right? And precisely because of this, we have to transvalue life because we have to set new horizons to reach. We have to set new paths for us to ascend further and advance further. If we don't create artificial points on the map to reach, then we're going to be stuck where we are. If we live only for that which reveals itself directly in front of us that we don't have to seek, for example, eating, sleeping, fucking, whatever, then we're not going to go anywhere, right? You have to be discontent. You have to be discontent and then look to fulfill that discontentment in means that are not readily available to you. And that's where you end up with these pursuits that are not inherently revealed by utility, by survival, by, let's say, lowercase life. Maybe I have to, the way that, there's lowercase and uppercase being and Heidegger, I got to do lowercase and uppercase life. That's what I got to do.
Radical capitalization.
That's right. There we go.
There you go.
But I hope that answers your question.
It does. So the trans portion of that valuation is that transitory. It's almost like seeing your life as an excess, as an abundance that needs to be spent.
It's just doing that which has no clear purpose. You're creating that purpose. It's just that existential action of asserting meaning, right?
It sounds like madness. Yeah.
There we go.
Getting back in the share.
Oh, by the way, I just realized I have like 30 more minutes.
Okay. You okay with going on? Good.
For some reason, I just looked at the time wrong. Yeah, I can go like 20, 30 more minutes from now, actually. So.
You let me know. I mean, I'm happy to go until the very end, but let me know if we get...
Actually, I'd like to go 9 more hours with no bathroom breaks.
Transvaluing our time. God bless.
Yeah. Time is relative.
And do you want to jump in here and read any of this too? I don't mean to just be hogging it. It's your words. I'm sure you would speak them better than I could, but...
Well, this thing specifically, I think we can skip this just because I already kind of touched up on this.
With the cockroach.
The cockroach. Yeah, I literally said those things. Let's see. I'm trying to see if we have... Yeah, we can start here. Yeah.
Man desires more. This desiring does not cease when his basic needs are satisfied. The sublime is born out of the more, towards which we are destined, once the clarity of existence and its vivid apparitions appear. After the fog of nature's chaos is burned away by the fires of innovation and technology. Once we can act in a method beyond utility, we must. The samsara is a cosmic reality, not to be overcome or liberated from, but embraced and spiritualized into a sacred, eternal truth of our existence. Eros and desire are the animating force of life, not to be denied, but to guide us towards efforts of non-utility, which bridge the temporal and the eternal, the infinite and the finite and the infinite. Moksha is life denial par excellence. The middle path is death. Nibbana is cowardice. And this is where it seems, because there is a higher utility than you're saying, right? Like the
Well, this is not
non-utility.
utility then.
But if that non-utility brings you towards a higher point, then the utility of the non-utility is transcendence. Does that make sense? That's where I see the paradox here, because it's
Oh, I
like
see what you're saying. You're saying that the absence of utility is sort of the
the
utility,
sublime. It is the birth of that sublime.
but then it's not you. Well, I guess, or I
It's
guess you can sort of
paradoxical,
semant this. I would
maybe
say my
semantics.
definition of the utilitarian or utility is like asserting there is an intrinsic good and fulfilling that intrinsic good, whether that's spiritually or biologically. I do think biological utility exists, right? So that's mainly what
Yeah,
I'm talking about here.
yeah.
And the sublime is that beyond biological utility. It's beyond survival. It's beyond life. It's will to power. So I don't know what you would call that, but to me, that's not utility because utility is predefined, right? Whereas this is not predefined.
Within that biological domain, would you go
Well,
so far?
prescriptive, yeah.
Would you go so far as saying that if it can be defined, especially defined extrinsically to oneself, then it is by definition not the sublime? That is not, if somebody tells you how to transvalue your life, then that is not a way that you can transvalue your life.
Well, I would say if you're being told, well, that's a good question because in a sense the question would be, is Christianity the sublime?
Hmm.
And I would actually say that in some ways it is because it is in some ways non-utilitarian. It's an attempt. Let's say it's an attempt to reach the sublime by asserting a new utility. I see what you're getting at now. Am I not asserting a new utility in a sense?
And I don't
Right?
think that's a
So
defeater. I think what you're saying
yeah,
is the point is still the point. It's just upwards
yeah.
instead of, again, eating its own
Uh,
tail.
I'm trying to think actually. So within my framework, what I consider Christianity, uh, something utilitarian or sublime. Christianity to me
Hmm.
would fall under the spiritual utilitarianism, right? A good asserted by a higher power, which is certainly different from the utilitarianism of nature and biology. So it is, in a sense, kind of closer to the sublime because it's now going away from the very evident, and it is transvaluing, it is asserting. I mean, this is what Nietzsche talks about with the Jews. The
Yeah.
Jews are transvaluing incorrectly, in my point of view, through Judaism, Christianity, Islam, whatever. But it is a transvaluation of life, right? It is a transvaluation of nature and biology. So in a sense, it is kind of reaching towards the sublime, just not maybe I'll have to create a lowercase sublime, uppercase sublime for this. But no, it is trying to do something in a way that Buddhism is not really trying to do. Because Buddhism is
Hmm.
not transvaluing. I mean, if anything, Buddhism is the least transvaluing of life. It's not transvaluing life at all. Christianity is trying to transvalue life. Now it's trying to transvalue life by asserting a new utilitarianism. So then in that case, it's not really reaching the sublime, but it is different and distinct from materialistic utilitarianism. It is something a little bit better because you are trying to posit something outside of the clear and evident utility.
Hmm.
Does that answer your question?
I'm hearing you say that Christianity was a step in a way that Buddhism potentially was not, but now we are in a position where we can take a further step even.
Well, they're steps in the right direction in two different ways because Buddhism is overcoming this idea of a static being.
Hmm.
But so it's taking a step correctly in the descriptive of life, but it's not taking a step forward in the prescriptive. It doesn't prescribe anything. It's like the Marxists. The Marxists are technically correct in a lot of ways where they say, well, these things have no inherent value that is predetermined by some cosmic force, sure, but that doesn't mean they're not that they're not valuable in terms of being able to build something. So in a sense, like Buddhism is like spiritual communism. But
I like that.
maybe
That's
I don't
good.
know. But so
And
they both take
Christianity is
steps.
spiritual capitalism. Would you feel comfortable with that?
I don't know. I also consider Christianity spiritual communism in a different way,
Interesting.
um, in the sense that it is maybe it's material communism. I don't know. They're both communistic in their own ways. I would say Buddhism is its deconstruction of the transcendent is
Hmm.
communistic, while Christianity's assertion of human rights and equality and all these things,
And
that's a
ultimate
transvaluing.
unification. Yeah.
Yeah, so the transvaluing aspect of Marxism is human rights,
Hmm.
is the veneration of the slave, or maybe not the veneration, but at least the representation of the slave. That is a transvaluing of life. There's nothing biological that says we deserve human rights. There's nothing biological that says equality. Like equality is anti-nature. So you can transvalue in a negative way. So I would say
Interesting.
Christianity is a negative transvaluation. Marxism is a negative transvaluation. Buddhism is just not a transvaluation at all. It's a transvaluation from a transvaluation, because the transvaluation being Hinduism, and then Buddhism is a transvaluation of that. It's not a transvaluation necessarily of reality, at least in my way, or in my point of view, in any substantive manner. So you can transvalue in a bad way. You can try to reach the sublime in a bad way that's constraining and is a force of aggression, but it's nuanced. There's not a clear universal thing you can apply to each of these scenarios. You have to look at them each individually on their own merits. Some transvalue in a certain way, and some transvalue in other ways, and it doesn't mean they're right. Just
Hmm.
because you're trying to reach the sublime doesn't mean you're trying to reach it in a correct way.
Hmm. I'm very glad you spelled that out. That gives me more questions. But to the Bataille quote, of all conceivable luxuries, death in its fatal and inexorable form is undoubtedly the most costly. The fragility, the complexity of the animal body already exhibits its luxurious quality, but this fragility and luxury culminate in death. In reality, when we curse death, we only fear ourselves. The severity of our will is what makes us tremble. We lie to ourselves when we dream of escaping the movement of luxurious exuberance, of which we are only the most intense form. Or perhaps we only lie to ourselves in the beginning to better experience the severity of this will afterward, carrying it to the rigorous extreme of consciousness. And this wasn't something I picked up when I first read it, but when Bataille is going through this, is he saying that this most intense form, that is our conscious perception? That's why he's tying it back to extremes of consciousness in the end? Or am I misreading what he's saying here as we are?
Yeah, the most intense form of let me reread that just to make sure I'm saying this correctly. So we lie to ourselves when we dream of escaping the movement of luxurious exuberance, of which we are only the most intense form, or perhaps we only lie to ourselves in the beginning to better experience the severity of this will, afterward carrying it to the rigorous extreme of consciousness. And I would say that honestly, the main part that I'm addressing in this quote is the beginning part, and the second part I just thought it sounded beautiful, so I had to keep it in there.
I love
But
that you did. Yeah.
we should take a second to try to understand what Bataille is saying here. I think one way we could read this is, first of all, we lie to ourselves when we dream of escaping the movement.
Yeah.
So that could be seen as Christianity, for instance, believing that we will have eternal life after death. That's escaping the movement of this luxurious exuberance. So the movement of luxurious exuberance being death, right? Of which we are only the most intense form. You could view that as we're the most intense form of death because we're aware of it, because we can confront it intentionally. So that's like the most intense form. You could sort of see that as capital B being. And then, or perhaps we only lie to ourselves in the beginning to better experience the severity of this will afterward, carrying it to the rigorous extreme of consciousness. This is a little bit more difficult. So why lie to ourselves in the beginning to better experience the severity of this will afterwards? That I'm not 100% sure what he's saying. And then carrying it to the rigorous extreme of consciousness.
Bringing that up into conscious perception.
Let's see. What would be the most rigorous extreme of consciousness? Carrying it to the most rigorous extreme of consciousness. I don't know. I mean, maybe you could see seppuku as that. That's like a very rigorous extreme of consciousness. You're feeling the most that you can feel through this, undescribable pain. And then in terms of, the beginning part of that, right before the most, the rigor, like why do we lie to ourselves in the beginning to experience the severity later on? I don't necessarily see how lying to ourselves about escaping. Maybe actually, well, here's one way to view it. If you ignore death early on and you live life in such an intense way because you're not concerned with death, then you do experience it probably, like if you don't, because actually no, this is great. Let's go back really quick.
Please.
Because I think I've understood this. So I had to think about it for a second. But
Bataille
take
is
the
incredibly
Buddhist.
deep.
Yeah, take the Buddhist for instance. So there's this Buddhist monk in the Vietnam War who lit himself on fire and held himself there for 5 minutes straight while he burned to death because he prepared himself for death. Right, he prepared himself for that moment. But that's kind of, this is going to sound super bad. That's a form of cowardice because you're not really experiencing the pain the way you should. You've trained yourself
Wow.
to not experience it in the most rigorous form, the way that the samurai can't prepare for seppuku and they don't prepare for seppuku. It's meant to be, maybe here's actually something I've been thinking of recently. Maybe you're meant to be afraid of death when you're meant to be a coward when you kill yourself because you need to feel this luxurious dispensation at the highest form. Maybe by preparing yourself for death, you're being a coward because you're not allowing yourself to be a coward at the end. You're preparing yourself for death. It's like people who take muscle relaxers before they kill themselves, right? You're preparing yourself so that when you do kill yourself, it won't be as painful. Or, shooting yourself in the head, blah, blah, blah. You're ending the pain. Maybe, we can lie to ourselves early on. And then because we've lied to ourselves, because we haven't prepared for it, because we weren't like the Buddhists who sought the middle path, because the middle path allows you to not be affected as much by life. Maybe by lying ourselves to feel the severity of this will later, you're actually maximizing that luxury because at the very end of your life, you feel the most pain possible and thus the most heightened experience. And maybe there's some beauty in that. And maybe that's something that we have to take into account. And maybe true courage is when you're killing yourself, you're like, no, fuck, I made a mistake. Maybe that's beautiful. Right? No, but like
Yeah.
it's kind of fucked up to think about.
It's the extreme. Yeah.
Yeah, now personally, I don't want to be afraid when I die. But at the same time, maybe I should also, I think maybe there's a middle path to that. I actually don't, so I don't think you should prepare yourself too much for death, but I also don't think that you should regret, like let's say you're committing seppuku. I don't think you should regret committing seppuku. I think you should realize, holy fuck, I'm never going to feel happy again. I'm never going to feel anything but pain. My last thing I'm going to feel is pain. But you be present in that and you feel the pain totally. But you also say, I'm not going to be afraid. I'm going to accept this. I'm going to accept death. Because maybe Bataille wants us to be afraid when we die. But I would say my personal approach would be in that moment of seppuku, feel the pain utmost. Don't prepare yourself. Don't take the muscle relaxers. Feel the total pain. Know this is inevitable. Know you're going to die. Know there's nothing you can do to stop it. But at the same time, don't be afraid. Accept it. Accept it while feeling all of it. And maybe that's also what Bataille wants. But I get the sense that maybe Bataille is saying true luxury is actually being afraid at the end, where I would say don't feel nothing, but don't be afraid at the same time. Feel the pain, stay with the pain. No, you're never going to feel pleasure again, but also keep cutting. And then, like, I think the middle ground would be have like a really beautiful woman watch you kill yourself, because then it's like you could kind of get some pleasure in that. It's like, like don't give her the ick. I can't give her the ick. I can't show her I'm afraid. I think that would be how I would do it.
Yeah.
Put a beautiful woman in front of you while you're killing yourself, so that you can't be afraid. You have to show her in that moment. And there's a certain pleasure in knowing you're killing yourself so well in front of her, which actually in Patriotism by Yukio Mishima, he does do that. But maybe in real life, since he was a little bit homoerotic, maybe one of the guys there was rumors that they were lovers. So maybe that was him doing what I'm doing.
The one who decapitated him?
Yeah. I believe the one that was meant to, because the first one failed and another one had to come in. I think it was the one who first tried to decapitate him.
Oh wow!
But in the movie, I think they switch up. The characters, because the guy who decapitates him in the movie isn't the one in the movie that's supposed to be his lover. Quote, it's a rumor, right? So who knows? But This was just a fun thought exercise. Have a beautiful woman in front of you. Maybe it's your, maybe if you know, like for example, if you have a significant other, have her stare at you as you kill yourself. Build, you know, feed off of her beauty as you rip your stomach apart, and then you can sort of balance pain and pleasure, and it could almost be anyway. I don't know. What the
That
fuck?
is an
I don't know.
intensity. That's an intensity, dude. Well,
Yeah,
I have this question for you.
yeah.
Does that have to be self-willed? Does that extreme consciousness, like we were talking about, can somebody transvalue your life for you? What if the person who had decapitated Mishima, what if as Mishima disemboweled himself, that person
Mm-hmm.
set down their sword, giving him the knowledge that they were not going to end his pain, that he was going to die in that extreme pain? Would that have been furthering his transvaluation of his own life, or since it was imposed on him without his consent, would it be devaluing it? Is that a step in the right or the wrong direction?
Yeah, I generally think things are better when you intentionally, it comes to you intentionally, because that's the whole thing with the
Agreed.
sublime, the natural occurring sublime. Like the ocean's beautiful, but in a sense, the Mona Lisa is more beautiful because it didn't come purely by random chance. It was an intentionally created thing. So yeah, I would say,
Interesting.
yeah, intentionally is better.
Yeah. So somebody can't add to your transvaluation by imposing suffering on you. It has to be
Well, they
taken up.
can, but it's not, it's inferior to you pursuing it yourself. There's something Julius Evola talks about where the slave doesn't need to be driven towards higher pursuits, because if you're a man of natural aristocracy of the soul, you're naturally going to pursue the path of pain that is going to lead to rewards.
Hmm.
But then at the same time, you know, many children, for example, like a true child prodigy, doesn't need to be pushed in the direction. However, many great people of history were pushed as children to be greater. So I think it's superior if you seek it yourself, but it doesn't mean it's bad if someone else imposes it on you. It just means more if you chose it yourself. But that doesn't mean the other thing is bad necessarily.
Hmm. It's a tough. I mean, it seems like a lot of the wicked things we see in the world are potentially traced back to that kind of question. So interesting.
Sure.
Bataille's confrontation of death is an embrace of the luxury intrinsic in temporality. I'm reminded of Achilles' quote in the film Troy: "The gods envy us. They envy us because we're mortal, because any moment may be our last. Everything is more beautiful because we are doomed. You will never be lovelier than you are now. We will never be here again." Man's being to death highlights the profundity of his existence. The richness of our life comes from the dialectic of the temporal and the eternal. Our ability to conceive of eternity while being finite beings, uppercase beings, destines us to confront death in a manner beyond utility. We must transvalue life. The lesser of us deny our agency and embrace that which is warm and comfortable, the affirmation of a lesser life through the denial of death's finality, the return of the eternal soul through theosis or moksha, the narcotization of existential angst, numbing of the spirit via finite pleasure, or surrendering to temporality through alleviating death above life. The best of us, imbued with a higher spirit, whose hearts burn with Promethean fire, embrace our agency and assert our will, transvaluing a meaning onto the cosmos through creation. And this was the part that gave me real heartburn. Honestly, this was the part that I like gave me angst, because you're laying out what had seemed to be the three paths previously espoused in the essay, and then you're saying there is a fourth way. There is this
Mm-hmm.
next step above all of the other paths, which is how I have read our previous conversations about theosis not being enough, like even
Yeah.
unification with the Godhead not actually being enough. Just fascinating. But yeah, if you have anything
Well,
to expound on there, please.
yeah, just because we're running up on time, I'll just briefly say this and we can get to the conclusion. But there's four paths. The first one is denying the material reality and seeking a false spiritual solution. The other
Mm,
one is ignoring the material reality and seeking a material solution. And then Buddhism is accepting, right? Now it's the first thing that accepts the material reality, but then has the wrong answer. It chooses to ignore the answer to that. And what we're doing is a fourth thing where we're accepting the reality, but we're also trying to transvalue something beyond it. So that's why I said Christianity transvalues, but it does it on false premises, while Buddhism doesn't transvalue biology, but it also accepts biology and reality for what it is. What we're doing is we're accepting life for what it is, and then we're transvaluing from there.
Hmm.
So that's the fourth, the fourth path, so to speak.
Hmm. Yeah, that acceptance you were talking about. It's very poignant, potent. In the Phenomenology of the Spirit, George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel writes, "The beautiful is the expression of the absolute spirit, which is truth itself. This region of divine truth, as artistically presented to perception and feeling, forms the center of the whole world of art. It is a self-contained, free, divine formation which has completely appropriated the elements of external form as material, and which employs them only as means of manifesting itself. Art, to Hegel, is an expression of the divine, an aesthetic form for the moral good of the cosmos, manifested in the beautiful." Aristotle writes in the Nicomachean, however you pronounce that, ethics, "All art is concerned with coming into being, i.e., when contriving and considering how something may come into being, which is capable of either being or not being, and whose origin is in the maker and not in the thing made. For art is concerned neither with things that are or come into being by necessity, nor with things that do so in accordance with nature." Art is this non-utilitarian, non-lowercase being thing. Sublimity. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I can I'll just sort of go through this part as well.
Please.
So Hegel is saying that art is a manifestation of the divine. Aristotle's saying is art is an exertion of the maker, the artist, onto reality. And then
Mm.
what I take from this, if you scroll down, I'll just briefly say this. So unlike Hegel, radical aesthetics is positing that we are not reflecting the divine, that what we consider the divine is an emergent property of chaos. Chaos is what is pre-existence. Out of that, things emerge unintentionally. And art becomes uh, influenced by chaos, influenced by nature, because there are beautiful things naturally by nature. There is an objective quality to beauty, as we've talked about before.
Mm.
And then that art becomes our intentional expression of that objective quality of beauty, not constrained by any specific style. But there is, like, beauty is not just subjective. A fat person, it can't be called beautiful. An ugly person can't be called beautiful. Like, there is beauty and there is not beauty, but within the umbrella of beauty, there are a lot of different expressions that don't have to be constrained within one art form, right? Um, so it's not a manifestation of the divine. The divine is an emergent property of life, and so on and so forth. And radical aesthetics is attempting to assert the divine through art, to assert an emergent divine, one that fulfills the same feeling of sublimity, but isn't rooted in anything pre-existent. It is entirely something of our own making into the future, influenced by the past, but not constrained by it. And again, as I said earlier, what we're trying to do is embrace hyper reality. Baudrillard and Camus and Sartre, all these different guys are kind of like rebelling in this passive way. What we're doing is we're actually seizing the system, which, yes, it's flawed. Yes, we are, Foucault says you need to get rid of all types of fascism in your life. Well, what we're doing is total body fascism, esoteric fascist bodybuilding. And we're saying, okay, look, tyranny is inherent to life. We are going to be slaves to certain archetypes, but that's necessary. You have to enslave yourself to be able to build. How do you think the pyramids were built? They were built through slavery. All these things, enslaving of ourselves and other lowercase beings and other uppercase beings, servitude and responsibility, the state, it's all necessary for greater freedom. And the true freedom, the greater freedom, is our feats, is our triumphs in the future, is our expansion of the cosmic Babel. All these things are a result of some form of imposing order onto the flux. We can't just be the flux. We can't just be the chaos. We can't just be these free schizophrenic beings. We do have to impose slavery on ourselves and others to truly be free. And true freedom comes with engaging with eternity, engaging beyond temporality, which we as finite beings do through being part of things that are greater than ourselves. On a very basic level, it's having children, but on a wider level, it's being part of civilizations that create that cosmic Babel into infinity. And as I sort of say here at the end here, uh, you know, there's beauty in waste, because to waste means you have to previously have. The gods live forever. The gods cannot lose anything. They cannot be any more than gods. We are a process of loss and gain, and we can continue to gain. And we are more beautiful because our gain walks alongside doom, our beauty walks alongside doom, our greatness and triumph walks alongside doom. It could all be over, but because we can lose it, it's a dialectic of us having it in the first place. And I end this essay with the basically the end of Runaway Horses by Yukio Mishima, and I won't say the context for this, but you can sort of begin to sort of guess what it's about. And it's the instant that the blade tore open his flesh, the bright disk of the sun soared up and exploded behind his eyelids. And it is the final luxurious dispensation, that waste and that ritual death of non-utility, that ultimate waste. And that's how I end it. And yeah, that's death in spring. We have died at the height of our beauty. It's about greatness, not utility. TLDR.
Amen. The transvaluation is flowing from you, warrior philosopher. I appreciate you coming on and walking us through that so much.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you want us to look forward to on your channel or in your Substack?
Sure.
Here?
Well, unlike KC, guys, like and restack and subscribe to my Substack. Didn't you see that? He neither subscribed to my Substack nor did he like it.
I like this post.
Restack it. No, it didn't show up as liked. It had the unfilled heart.
I must have done it on my other one.
You didn't like, restack, or subscribe. Come on, guys.
We'll get you in
on. There. So unlike KC, do that. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. This might turn into a book one day. Ideally, that's the plan. There we go. Transvaluing Substack right now.
Yeah, no pledge. Sorry.
No, it's okay. This is free. I'm not into the. You guys can buy my book when it comes out. That's how you guys can. The essays are free. I want my ideas out there to be seen. But anyway, yeah, podcast will probably be out. Well, yeah, probably this is gonna have come out after my last podcast. But besides that, I got some great interviews with some big people coming up not too long from now. And I don't know what the hell I'm going to do my next essay on, but I think I'm going to do it potentially the state as a work of art and talk about Contra, Deleuze, and all these guys, why we need a certain form of tyranny to be able to create and to be able to exist in a higher way, and how there's actually freedom in that. But anyway, yeah, like I said, guys, like the Substack article if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my Substack. I'm trying to make Substack more of me, whereas my YouTube, I talk to different people, so I cover things that I don't necessarily have as much interest in, but this is all my ideas, my personal assertions, and yeah, important part of my new work that I'm trying to do. So yeah, thank you guys, and thank you, Casey, for having me on.
God bless. Honor to have you, man, and rest in peace, Raul. This is dedicated.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Comrade, dove è il camarade Raul Giammatteo presente alla morte a noi. Yeah, there we go. He lives on.